This is Counterpoint.
Welcome to this, the October 31st edition, or should I say the Halloween edition of Counterpoint. I'm Joshua Goodman, joined by Roland Freudenstein of the Center for European Studies. Happy Halloween, Roland.
Guten Abend.
You're getting into the
scary.
German.
He's always scared by this.
Any comment on that would be inappropriate. I'm just going to let it go. We also have Daniel Schwammenthal, the director of the AJC Transatlantic Institute.
Good evening.
No front page feature this week.
Can't have it every day.
And as we promised, and we fulfill a promise for the second week in a row, a special guest, Jan Techau, the director of Carnegie Europe here in Brussels. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you very much.
I guess being Halloween, we should at least comment on it in some regard. And I'm not Italian, but in the spirit of our former colleague Emanuele Telenghi, I had the thought this morning that perhaps the most popular Halloween costume in Italy this week will be Silvio Berlusconi in a prison outfit. Given that, in case you weren't following the news, he was sentenced to prison, though no one expects him to ever make an appearance there.
Yeah, that's true. I think he is past the age at which people can be put into prison in Italy.
Oh, is that true? I have
I heard that wasn't it. I heard the issue is that he has
He has
three
four
appeals.
Yeah, but irrespective, even if
okay.
the appeals didn't work, he would not actually go to prison because there's a maximum 75 years.
Oh, really? How old is he?
He's 76.
Oh, is that?
And if he had to go to jail, it would probably be his jail in any case.
On Sardinia, on the beach.
I'll admit the cynic in me thought that if he exhausted all three appeals and he really was going to jail, he'd just finally take his seat at the head of the EPP Italian list in the European Parliament and claim parliamentary immunity.
Don't keep the EPP out of it, please.
Roland's getting nervous.
It's Halloween, Roland.
This is his house of horrors.
Yeah, right. You know the saying, "Daddy, Daddy, do the goys have Halloween too?"
From the non-Jewish members.
It was actually about Christmas trees, but I just
Yeah.
All
twisted it a little bit.
Let's get down to the serious business. Over the past few weeks, we've talked about the potential visit of Tehran of the European Parliament's delegation for relations with Iran and the shortlisting of two Iranian activists for the Parliament's prestigious Human Rights Award, the Sakharov Prize. Both separate yet related stories, and now inextricably connected. Last week, the European Parliament awarded the Sakharov Prize to Iranian lawyer and human rights advocate Nasrin Sotoudeh and filmmaker Jafar Panahi. According to some, a long overdue recognition of the struggle for political freedoms and human rights in Iran. As a result, the European Parliament's Executive Bureau, the Conference of Presidents, stipulated that the delegation scheduled to arrive in Tehran 2 days later would have to meet with the prize winners, something Iran's leadership objected to, and as a result, the trip was called off, thus bringing an end to a rather messy affair. For those who followed it, there were rumors that it was on, it was off, it was on, it was off. Every 2 hours it was a different story and led to some very interesting reporting in the press. Roland, once the award was given to the Iranian activists, it seemed impossible for the delegation to go without a guarantee that they would meet them. Does not.
Well, frankly speaking, I don't know why he took the Sakharov Prize to make them make them cancel the trip. I don't think they should have gone under any circumstances. So the question about meeting the prize winners or not should not have been even the reason not to go, because I think they should not have gone anyway.
And that was the line from the EPP? The conservative bloc of the European Parliament?
I think it was, yeah. I mean, didn't follow it closely, but yes.
Jan, why don't we get your opinion on this, since you haven't been around?
Yeah, I'm the scary Halloween edition to this one, I guess. No, I do not agree with what Roland just said, that they should not have gone under any circumstance. I think it's now right to call it off, and to call it off in connection with the Sakharov Prize and the ability or the inability to visit these folks. But to travel there, to go there, and to be present on the ground And to do these kinds of trips is actually quite useful. It's not about schmoozing with the enemy or schmoozing with dictators. That is an easy kind of jibe against it. I think it's also about, encouraging those on the ground in that very diverse political scene in Iran that is much more diverse than most of us will think, to encourage those. There are still people out there who care and who come and who want to see what's going on in the country. That is immensely important in a country that is so isolated and so cut off from the rest of the planet. So there is value in this. And so I know that this is an issue that is much disputed and on principle, but I think we are not in the situation yet where we have to do that. And the little influence that we have and the little visibility that we can create for ourselves, we should actually use.
Yeah, Jan, but you did admit that there are situations in which one should not go. Well, it's in the eye of the beholder whether that's given already in Iran, but I think it is. And we all know the regime would have used any picture with anybody from the European Parliament as proof that, look, we're not isolated. This is the point. And I think there are other ways to communicate to the population or whoever wants to listen in Iran that the rest of the world is with them and is interested in their affairs. There are radio broadcasts, there is the internet, there are social media. There are many, many ways to communicate interest in Iranian affairs, short of a visit by representatives of the European Parliament.
We had an opportunity to have a look at the draft program, and on top of the arguments that we were just presented, it was so heavily slighted towards a very official visit. There were maybe 25 program items. And there was only one small kind of like hidden little event with allegedly with human rights activists. But even that, the description was not very clear. But every single event was with regime officials, including one official who is on the EU's own sanction list for human rights violations. And then there was a heavy program item that, in my view, seemed to have been designed to underline cooperation between Iran and the European Union, because there were a lot of events around drug trafficking and countering drug trafficking cooperation, which is, of course, very ironic, given that Iran at the same time uses its proxy Hezbollah, which is created and funded, to smuggle, to traffic drugs into southern Europe. So,
but drug trafficking is a significant problem from the Afghan border into Iran, and is some would argue borderline epidemic situation at this point in
right. But Iran is not squeaky clean, and this is sort of an area where we actually have shared interest, because it uses drug trafficking at the same time to raise funds for Hezbollah, etc. in Europe.
Hezbollah uses drug trafficking to raise funds for Hezbollah. As Matt Levitt said last week on our show,
Iran, it's a creation and funded by Iran. So I really think that the potential benefits one could see would have been completely undermined by the sort of pictures, by the propaganda purposes that such a trip would have offered to the regime.
So my concern when I was looking at it was all the points around, and I know a couple of the MEPs who were really went out of genuine interest in the arguments you articulated, Jan. The biggest concern I noticed was with the person leading the trip, with the chair of the Iran delegation, and the example is after she came down, she faced a lot of pressure for the presence of that sanctioned official being on the schedule. Her response was, "I've taken all these people that they voiced concerns of, and a lot of that was in the AJC press release. But I can't control who walks into a room once a meeting started." And for her, there was no red lines at all, and which created a situation for the Iranians to manipulate, I think, the program and the whole visit. And that's when you started, I believe, to see a lot of the people who came for the reasons you stated backing off, because it started as a list of 16 people, and in the end, only 5 were scheduled to go on the final trip.
I think this is an important point, because if you apply those very strict standards that Roland and Daniel have used, I think then diplomacy becomes basically impossible with lots of people that we dislike. Diplomacy is talking to people that you dislike. It's easy to talk to people that you like. And this is the real question that lurks behind it. I mean, should we have any kind of diplomacy with Iran at the current stage, or is that a futile thing? The risk of getting, abused and for propaganda purposes, the wrong pictures being circulated and everything, that's always there. The question is there any value in having diplomacy at all? I think that's the principal question that lurks behind all of this. And my feeling is that, we're working with Iran on all kinds of issues. The EU is heavily involved in this kind of nuclear dispute where Ashton and her sidekicks are trying to, keep the machine kind of going. We're working with Iran on Afghanistan on a daily basis. NATO does. And so there is all of this stuff going on. I don't see, I would just, accept the risk of being, utilized with the pictures and images in the newspapers just for getting there, because you also have a chance then to get a message across. You talk to these people. It's not just about, being photographed. It's about talking to these people. And even though that's not going to change Iran ultimately in the end, tomorrow, if we don't use this, we can just as well stop doing diplomacy altogether. And this is what I'm worried about.
I slightly disagree. I think there's obviously a role for diplomacy even with Iran, and there are the legitimate P5+1 negotiations going on with people who have a mandate from governments, from people, and there is cooperation going on with NATO, etc. Of course, the whole role of Iran. It's we all know that they have been supplying these explosive devices that have killed numerous of Allied troops in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So I'm not quite sure what sort of diplomacy is going on there and whether it's useful. But, in any event, but I think when it comes to this European Parliament delegation, they don't really have a mandate. They don't really have anything to negotiate. They don't have any power. They have nothing to offer them. They
do have a mandate. I would disagree. Their mandate is to maintain relations with the Parliament.
That's their own mandate with the European Parliament. What I'm saying is they don't have a mandate in order, like the P5+1. They can offer Iran something. They negotiate really about the nuclear issue, and they can offer them maybe to soften the sanctions or remove them. So there's something to discuss. So whereas European Parliament has its own mandate, but what I'm saying is they don't really have a role in these negotiations. So they can't really achieve anything other than, in my view, being used by the other side for propaganda purposes.
Well, they do have a role in the promotion of human rights in the country, and that was why the Parliament stipulated that they should go. And I think it was reported, whether correctly or not is unclear, it was reported that the intention, as decided by the Conference of Presidents, was not only to meet with these people who were to receive the Sakharov Prize, but to actually give it to them in Iran, since one's in prison, the other one's banned from traveling for at least 10 years, I believe. They're not going to be in Strasbourg in December to receive the prize itself, which is indicative of how important it is that they receive it, and so many more in the country. It does touch on, Jan, as you said, on the question of diplomacy, and I guess the next stage in that might be unveiled early next year, with reports that the U.S. may sit down directly with Iran to discuss their nuclear program. That will obviously wait till after the election next week, more likely until the inauguration in January, when the cabinet will be set. One would think you probably do need a Secretary of State to negotiate with a foreign country, but we'll see moving forward. But speaking of the U.S. elections, we're going to turn to that right after this short break. You're listening to Counterpoint. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Counterpoint. We were enjoying some trick-or-treat candy during the break, so our mouths might be a little, I don't know what the word is.
Chocolatey.
Chocolatey, that's exactly
This
it.
show is full of love.
You're the best addition to the show yet, yeah, and Roland is probably going to feel very hurt about that. No, he doesn't care.
No.
He's so easily bribed. A little bit of chocolate.
Well, now
I'm his creature.
It's true. Now that Roland's voice is on the intro jingle, I think he feels secure in his position.
I'm good.
Although the last guy who was on the intro jingle, Emanuele, suddenly disappeared from the show. So,
but not from the world.
Perhaps the relocation is in order. Back to business. The debates are over, and the campaigns are nearing an end. On Tuesday, the U.S. electorate will head to the polls to decide who will lead their country. I believe it'll be the sixth or eighth time that Americans will vote on November the 6th. Daniel knows it.
The sixth time.
Daniel is our fact machine. Sixth time on the 6th.
And all 6 times the Republicans have won. So
we'll return to that in a moment. Well, that solves it. We don't need to talk about the elections. We know what's going to happen.
It's
excellent.
eerie.
Will they return President Obama to the White House, or will they jettison him in favor of former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney? The race is extremely tight, with analysts suggesting that it could come down to 9 states and perhaps just Ohio. It's worth noting, since Daniel...
2 counties in Ohio.
Yeah, 3.
Yeah, 3 counties. There you go.
Crazy stuff.
Daniel, the expert on fun election facts, will probably point out that no one has ever won the election without winning Ohio.
Well, I didn't know that.
Oh.
No Republican, I think.
No,
I think
Republican,
no one.
I think
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Anyways, in the countdown to Tuesday, I want to ask all of you. So, what are the factors you'll be watching, which might give an indication as to how the vote will turn out? What is that element that could launch one candidate above the other? Daniel?
Well, a November surprise. I think the one sort of data point that people are going to be watching is the next figures on unemployment, which are supposed to come out this week or even on Monday. There were some doubts whether because of the hurricane they may not be able to produce the data because obviously it hit New York and to a lesser degree also Washington, where all these people are crunching the numbers. But it is widely expected that if they manage to put out the number, that there will be a correction of last month's data, which seemed to have shown an improvement in unemployment, and the expectation is would show that this was only a fluke and may make correct number up to perhaps even again above 8%. Which, if that were indeed to happen, that would be particularly in these last few days left of the campaign, probably it wouldn't be a decisive point, but it would certainly get a lot of.
It does touch at
a lot of editing, because everything is about the economy,
exactly,
and it's about the record.
But it is also about leadership, and I think that Hurricane Sandy will have a big effect. Natural disasters are always the moment of the executive, the moment of the incumbent, and it's very, very hard to look as good as, provided that of course that the incumbent reacts properly and gets assistance to the right places and so on. But that seems to be the case, and then it is extremely hard for the challenger to pull equal in terms of demonstrating leadership, demonstrating capability.
In fact, would you not say that the best demonstration in opposition, the person running the opponent can show is restraint in not trying to politicize this. This terrible.
Yeah, but restraint is restraint.
Yeah,
but that's exactly it.
And that hurts.
You lose the airtime.
You lose everything.
And I mean, the thing that Governor Romney did was, to call upon people to buy foodstuffs and donate for the victims of Hurricane Sandy is good. It's probably the best thing one can do in this situation. But I think in terms of public perception, it is by far not as good as what Obama did in, basically pulling Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, on his side, who was a staunch Republican and very much a challenge, a critic of the president before that, and now he's publicly displaying his approval of President Obama's actions. So, I think that beats any advantage that Romney could possibly achieve by anything he could do by several magnitudes.
But at the same time, if and one can recall the terrible devastation of Hurricane Katrina, if FEMA and if other forces, regardless of how directly responsible the president is for their poor performance, but if they do not perform well, if they show up late, if people are still without power come Election Day, even though New York is going to vote Democrat as it always does, DC and most of the eastern corridor, northeastern corridor will vote Democrat as it always does. It's the image on CNN that the swing voter in Ohio sees of people on the on the below 30th Street in Manhattan, arguably the center or the epicenter of American wealth. Wall Street being without power, that could swing voters.
Maybe they would actually enjoy it.
Well, yeah, my feeling is that even before this hurricane, before Sandy, impression management was key. I mean, we're talking now 6 days, and in that short corridor before the elections, there are only very few voters who are undecided.
Right.
And those voters have not made up their mind because they're not convinced that, competence or positions, make much of a difference. They're looking for the kind of impression that actually, turns them to one or the other. And this is why the hurricane is so difficult for Romney, because, as Roland said, in these crisis situations, the executive, the president, has the better chance to create a good impression. And the risk is also higher for the president because he can also fail.
Right, exactly.
But if he does it well, he has a huge advantage. And so we could see how important, impression management is even in the first debate, which is now a couple of weeks back, when it wasn't, incompetence that cost Obama the victory in that election, but his seeming uninterestedness and his kind of, aloofness in a sense, body language,
arrogance.
And it's impression management that is the issue. And so if that has any kind of impact in Ohio and in those 3 counties, those ominous 3 counties, then it's probably Obama's moment now, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, nobody can predict this, but at the moment, within the framework of this impression thing, I think Obama has fairly good chances to swing, to gain some of those undecided ones that are still out there in the street.
Well, for me, it's an excellent point on the public perception, because that's exactly what we talked about a couple weeks ago with the debate being so important for the first time ever, really having an impact. And maybe it really does come down to, it wasn't what they said about the policies, it's how they presented themselves when they talked about the policies, and how Romney comes off so authoritative on the economy, whereas Obama is looks like he has an idea, but he's not completely
Well, in
sure.
the first debate.
Yeah, in the first debate, and even, but I believe you said even in the second debate, when it came to the question, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago?
Well, in opinion polls in the second debate, Obama was generally seen as having won that overall debate, but when then the people were asked how the two fared on economic policy, again, Romney was given much higher marks. But I'm not sure whether this was really a result of the second debate or the sort of the lasting effect from the first one.
No, I think the allegedly higher economic competence of Governor Romney is a given in this campaign, and
so then perhaps
but he really only established this after the first debate. It was not. He was really behind in the polls. And he was painted as a sort of robber baron capitalist who fires people and takes companies apart. So he wasn't really given high marks generally for economy before that.
But Roland, if you say that this is the perception there, and that it's essentially he's won that issue, so does that not devalue the employment numbers, because he's already won there, and now people are looking to another issue to make their deciding factor?
But I seriously would not put too much emphasis on the employment figures. Mm-hmm. I think a large part of voters, correctly or not, will assume that these figures are fiddled with by whomever for whoever purpose, but it's like yes, a U.S. A government agency gives unemployment figures. How much if you're a staunch critic of the U.S. government and its president currently, how much do you believe?
Yeah, I think if we are back at 8%, it'll be front page news across the United States. Whether it's justified or not to look just at this one data point is a different question. But with so little new, there's not going to be, another big development. So newspapers, journalists have to write about something. Having been one, I remember, I think.
I think I do agree that they would be front page news, but I agree with Roland that they won't play much of a role at this late point in the game. What I disagree with is that, these are kind of fiddled numbers in any case, and that people are suspicious about the numbers.
No, I didn't say they are fiddled numbers. I think,
but that they will take it as fiddled.
People will not fully trust them.
I'm not sure, because, so far American numbers have been rather reliable, and there have been abysmal numbers for Obama, during his own time in office. So it's not like they're using that. I mean, it's not. We're not talking about Banana Republic stuff here in the narrow sense. So, but again, I think the numbers are not as important as this impression moment, this last minute, kind of dash for the ballot box, and whoever creates a good last minute kind of picture persona will probably benefit.
Well, a lot of people always put emphasis on the people who vote ahead of the elections, and early voting is very common in the U.S. I mean, we have to remember that not a lot of people participate in the vote in general. The numbers are, as a lead into a topic later on the show, Ukraine-esque in the 40% sometimes. So a lot of weight is put in there, and that was something that really propelled people argue propelled President Obama to his victory, because he had such I think it was 55% to 40% advantage in the polls for early voters. And that's not the case this time, based on something you sent me by email, Daniel. A Gallup poll of people who are voting early found that Romney actually of those who have already voted, Romney holds the advantage 54% to 40%.
By 6 percentage points.
Yeah, 6 percentage points. And those who plan to vote early ahead of time, it's a similar, next week.
Then those who still plan to vote early, it's a
dead heat of 49,
dead heat.
Right.
And those who plan to vote on election day, again, 5 or 6 point advantage to Romney, according to this poll. So.
That's a pretty remarkable statistic. It seems the Republicans are either getting the vote out, or I don't know. The cynic in me says that a lot of Obama's support base came from students, came from young people. They really worked well in the colleges, and these people have all graduated 4 years later, and a lot of them, I imagine, are either unemployed or in jobs they do not desire very much.
Or have moved away and are not registered to vote any longer.
Exactly. That's entirely possible.
But did they not continue their networks with students? I thought it was a very organized.
It was, but I don't. It was also a very expensive movement, and you can't continue it for 4 years. You have to restart. You can't sustain that. You don't have the money for it. And this election, it doesn't have the same passion. It doesn't have the same sensation.
No, that's for sure, and it's much tighter now than we anticipated half a year ago. But these polls, these exit polls, if you will, of people that voted early, that's the number I would question, because that's extremely fluffy data.
Right.
Very hard to poll in a representative way. And, I think the margin of error on those numbers is probably pretty high. And
they said 3%, like with most polls, but
every poll has a 3% margin of error.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they all say. Yeah. So I would be more skeptical on those numbers, actually. But in any case, I mean, no matter whether we're talking 46 to something, the fact that, Romney has an advantage in this, and that he runs so strongly is already something that he would not have been able to anticipate half a year or a year ago. Right, so it's a tremendous success of his campaign.
Exactly. Even if he's in a dead heat, even if we take away the 6% advantage, it's still a big turnaround from last year, and he's clearly doing a lot better than Senator McCain.
And you can see also in the sort of ads he's now running in Pennsylvania, which is apparently they think it's now in play, and Obama is also again running ads in states which were considered safe bets. So.
Perhaps it's an indication that the Obama campaign thinks their support base is a bit lethargic, but they've now changed their slogan from forward to forward with an exclamation mark. So they're really putting that effort.
That's impressive.
Given the tight nature of the race, hopefully we'll have the final results by next week's show. You never know. I think Daniel and I will be getting up at 4 a.m. to watch it.
The advertising campaign that came up with that idea probably made a lot of money on that one exclamation
mark.
mark.
The most expensive exclamation mark.
A $3 million exclamation mark. Well, we'll be covering this.
I would have done it half the price.
I'm sure you would have. We'll be covering this story next week. We'll be right back after this break. You're listening to Counterpoint. Welcome back. The conflict in Syria persists, and an end seems further and further away. Why? Well, one significant reason is the fact that more and more players are being dragged into the equation, and in a truly involved way. There's the fighting on the Turkish-Syrian border. There's reports that Hezbollah is launching rockets at rebels from Lebanon. Now rebel forces are fighting with Palestinians in southern Syria, and further reports that Jordanian militants are crossing into Syria to fight. All this begs the question of, well, who's next? Some here in Europe want the EU or the broader West to join, but with so many players, I have to wonder if intervention, particularly along the lines of just a humanitarian mission and a no-fly corridor, is possible. Can the EU, US, Canada, or even the broader NATO coalition get involved without really fighting on one side or the other?
No, in the end, it can't. It has to take sides in the end. Also, morally, it's very unclear. It's unlike in the Libya situation where the moral case was so very clear. In this case, it's less clear, and we now have the kind of spillover scenario, this kind of domino theory scenario that we've been talking about for a while. That the Syria thing might spill over, and then that we have reactions from all kinds of involved parties, all the way down to Egypt and possibly Saudi Arabia and with their clients and so on and so forth. For the West, the situation is a huge dilemma, because the more complicated it gets, and you just lined up all of those combatant groups that are already involved, the more complicated it gets, the stronger the case for intervention, but the less likely intervention becomes because it's messier, and the military case for intervention, or even the humanitarian case for intervention, becomes much harder to justify and even to plan. I mean, we're talking about very practical issues here: where to strike, whom to strike, with whom to actually side. From where, with how many people, what kind of alliance, on what kind of legal basis, if we want one. So these are the things that are getting more complicated by the hour, basically, and that's the huge dilemma. It's a foreign policy conundrum, and we've probably missed a point earlier,
right?
And now it's too late. But even earlier, we had no idea how we should have done it, and so I see that the spillover is horrible, but the policy options for policymakers in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere in Europe are also horrible. So where are we going? I find this extremely puzzling, and it's definitely one sign that we, as the West collectively, have much less of a say and much less influence than we used to already. I think it's a sign of at least a relative decline, and that's all not very well. It's not boding well for what's coming up in the future.
And then there's still the factor of they could be pulled in regardless, without a clear strategy as to what to do if Turkey uses NATO to defend itself. Is that the worst case scenario, that they get pulled into a military operation that or a scenario that they really didn't want to be in and haven't thought through?
I mean, the Turks, after an initial outburst, actually, and an initial kind of NATO element that they inserted into the debate, have calmed down and have played the NATO side of this actually quite carefully. So currently, I cannot imagine a scenario where the Article 5 option in NATO would be triggered. I mean, we're talking about a different kind of threat,
right,
a different kind of scenario. So I don't fear that NATO as a whole gets dragged into this. But of course, we as the West could get dragged into it in all kinds of ways. I mean, we have interests in the region. We have partners that we think should be safe, and there are so many loose ends. I mean, I'm not a Middle East expert. I will
right,
freely admit this. But even the Middle East experts that I talk to say that this is such a conundrum, such a difficult situation that they have no idea where to even start intervening if they think about scenarios for intervention.
Right. Certainly, one of the biggest questions is no one knows who the opposition truly is, or the rebel forces, and those that they do know, a lot of them can't be trusted, and it doesn't even seem like there is a cohesive opposition. And should they overthrow Assad, they might immediately turn on each other.
Also, if I may add one thing, the problem is in Syria, we don't have a state structure fighting for survival anymore. Mm-hmm. There is no such thing as a state, like in the Iraq case, for example, where a state was functioning in a sense and fighting for survival in a regime. In this case, the regime has turned into a militia. Right. And it's now one militia against the other. And there's not even the pretense of a Syrian state acting here. And that makes it so very difficult, to look at least for a formal situation, some kind of reinstatement of formal authority. This is now a free-for-all, mm-hmm, and it's down to murder business on all sides, and that's the thing that's really scary.
So Roland or Daniel, I mean, maybe to bring you guys into the conversation here, if it's really a hopeless scenario, what do you see? What do you see the West doing, the EU, the US? What can they do beyond sort of just continue to condemn it and watch it unfold? Or unravel?
Yeah, well, it may actually drag on for years as a Syrian civil war without outside intervention. It's mm-hmm, possible. But and yet I do believe that the humanitarian costs of that will will rise significantly over time, and that we'll get into a situation where we feel even worse about not having done anything than we're already feeling now. And so I believe that we should think about, safe havens for civilians. We should think about a no-fly zone. I mean, these are the two things that we should think about.
I would agree. I mean, I see the dilemma of whom do you actively support on the opposition side, but for instance, depriving the Assad regime of air superiority would be relatively straightforward. Obviously, there's no real political appetite to get involved in such a conflict. But the problem is that just simply standing outside. I mean, apart from the obvious humanitarian problem, is that other people, other nations are not standing outside. The Saudis and others are actively arming particular factions of the Syrian opposition, and those are exactly not the elements that the West would want to see taking over power there. And so I think the sort of really passively looking on is not a policy. It's sort of like we don't have any good options, so we just stand by. I don't think is really smart either.
I think we hear about the no-fly zone and the safe havens a lot. No-fly zone is probably the easiest thing to do comparatively. Safe havens is difficult because you become partisan the moment you do it, and you have to protect them militarily, and the people that are combatants will use those areas, and automatically you're in bed with people that you don't know. The other thing that I find much more important in this case is, apart from this instinct we need to do something, is what is the desired end state? What is what is the political end state that we want? And, derived from that, what is the military kind of goal that we would try to pursue? And nobody can give me an answer to that. Is this, reinstate, the status before it all happened? Is this, to install some kind of national council like in Libya? Or is this maybe about, reordering the Middle East as a whole? Because obviously all of these borders, or many of these borders, are not viable borders anymore, as we can see in the Kurdish question.
Right, so creating like a tribal microstate, a bunch of tribal microstates around there, and that gets into the Syria is not even that big to start with.
Wait. Iraq is still holding together. I mean, it looked
barely.
But in 2006 it was very close to collapse, and they went back from the brink. I'm sorry.
But they had the U.S. there at the time, and now they don't. And with violence,
and it's falling apart basically. So I don't buy that argument. I mean,
no, but it according to the pundits of international relations and the think tank world, Iraq would have fallen apart 10 years ago, or 8 years ago.
And a lot of them said there'd be a smooth transition to democracy as well. So
so the jury is still out. But I think, particularly, we see in Syria the creation of a sort of another semi-autonomous Kurdish region that would, they speak the same language, it's basically the same people, naturally ally itself with the Kurdish region in Iraq. I think that would further destabilize also Iraq. But so I think this generally we can't say yet whether Iraq is holding together or not. It's just a year or so that the U.S. troops have left, already we can see that violence, certainly terrorism, is coming back. They are not that much reported anymore, but almost every other week there is another terror attack with dozens of victims.
Well, as with Iraq, as with Syria, as with Iran, all of these issues, it seems nothing will happen, at least for another week, and perhaps a few weeks after that, as the U.S. election, the dust of the U.S. election settles. We were talking about it seems the consensus almost here was that a humanitarian corridor, no-fly zone, is probably the next big step we'll see, but President Obama has said the movement and certainly the usage of chemical weapons would be a red line for the U.S., and I imagine if it's for the U.S., then it's probably for the entire West as well. But that's sadly in the hands of the Syrians for the most part, or the Assad regime. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll turn to a much lighter topic, the elections in Ukraine. Please stay with us. You're listening to Counterpoint. Welcome back to Counterpoint. If you could listen to us during the commercial break, you'd see we're probably going to change the show from politics to a cultural or anthropological study of music, because we're getting more.
We should do a show on music once.
We should, maybe, yeah.
You know,
Look at
and it has a lot to do with politics too.
Maybe
we can get Mel Torme finally.
Oh, jeez.
No, we won't.
There's no substance in that. I mean, no depth. But we can look at the politics of music, or music's role in politics. I think that there's an idea, perhaps for our end of year, towards the end of year, or our over the Christmas break shows that we pre-record.
The University of Limerick had a 3-day seminar on David Bowie recently.
Yes.
I just, you know.
I know you want
That's
to
a
go.
crisis symptom. That's definitely a crisis symptom.
No, it's not. This is one conference I wouldn't want to miss.
I wouldn't have wanted to
not
miss.
to miss.
Yeah,
This is alienating all listeners that were born, after 1871.
Damn it.
I don't know if that actually hurts our listenership. I'm not sure we have a very young demographic.
Okay, young
Good
listeners
point,
out there.
Josh.
Anyways, since we're running out of time, let's focus on the issue at hand, which is Ukraine held elections this week, and the reviews, if you will, are not very flattering. Take the statement of the OSCE, which said the process, quote, reversed democracy. Ouch. The results seem to favor President Viktor Yanukovych's Party of Regions, which claimed, at least the last report I saw, 34.2% of party list votes, compared with 22.5% for the party of Yulia Tymoshenko, who incidentally is still in prison and announced a hunger and water strike in opposition to the election corruption. A Swedish MEP who headed the OSCE delegation mission had this to say after the polls closed, and I quote, "Considering the abuse of power and the excessive role of money in this election, democratic progress appears to have reversed in Ukraine." Are we all in agreement that this election was not good for democracy in Ukraine? And if so, where does the West go from here in its engagement?
Well, on Ukraine itself, I mean, it's in that. Indeed, you said before the music break that let's move to an easier subject than Syria. I'm not sure Ukraine fits that description.
I was being facetious.
Okay,
Like the music.
Now, what I'm worried about is two things. One is the general trend of the backslide, the rollback of the color revolutions in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. In that sense, Ukraine is only part of a larger development.
Who else are you referring to?
Well, I'm referring to some Central Asian republics, and there is a risk of that happening in Georgia. In a way.
Although you were positive about the Georgian elections,
I think the election itself, the peaceful transfer of power, first in Georgian history, is definite progress. But okay, well, let's not talk about details of Georgian politics here.
That's fine.
But I'm not sure about the stable future for that country. Now, back to Ukraine. What I'm also worried about is what I would call the Belarusification of Ukraine. And that has a domestic component and has an external component. The domestic one is, of course, Ukraine is still, by comparison to Belarus, a much freer country in relative terms, and will remain so for a long time. But the spin, the tendency is worrying as Ukrainian democracy becomes more and more authoritarian. And you gave the quotes of OSCE and other observers. And the external Belarusification of Ukraine is, that mentality, the mindset, which is being created or reinforced by the government, which says, in Lukashenko of Belarus calls it the fighting with the two monsters. It's like, yes, we're afraid of being controlled too tightly by the Russians. We want to preserve some kind of independence, and we're going to play Russia against the West, and vice versa, and we're going to achieve the best possible results for our own independence that way. And for 10-15 years after the end of communism, Ukraine looked like it had more or less made its decision in this question and was trying to get closer to the West, Of course, with a part of the country not completely agreeing, or part of the population not completely agreeing with that. But by and large, there was a tendency, at least, of not trying to play this dangerous game of balancing between Russia and the West. And I think Yanukovych is deliberately trying to play that game, at the detriment of the interests of Ukrainian people, at the detriment of freedom, human rights, pluralism, and good governance in Ukraine.
So how does the West react? Since you invoked the example of Belarus and the Belarusification of Ukraine, I mean, it's worth noting that the relations between Belarus and the West are terrible. To be blunt, the EU has very severe sanctions against them, political sanctions, and they continue to strengthen them essentially every time the issue comes up in a discussion. The US is also not very favorable to them. So what does the EU do, Jan, here?
Well, unlike the Syria example, in this case, the EU actually does have a real political option, and that is the association agreement that was negotiated with Ukraine. That had been in the pipeline for a long time. Very painful negotiation process, but it's ripe for signature, for signing it. And in my opinion, the EU should press ahead and sign it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, no, you can't ever do this. You can't, work with this dictator. I'd say again, do this because in that thing, first of all, it's a very attractive and very desirable political prize for them to have. But the interesting thing is, if the EU got its act together on some of the clauses that are in this thing, we have the classical human rights clauses, the classical government clauses in there, which the EU has never been serious about in other cases.
Right.
If they got their act together in this case and used them, defined the standards and held the government accountable and against those standards, that would be a political option. Now that takes unity and requires unity on behalf of the Europeans, and that's a difficult thing to get. But the tool is there, and it's much more on our side now to decide how we want to use that tool. It's not like we're totally clueless. And I think this is the one thing. Final thing to say, Roland is right in saying that, the country is basically trying to find a middle way between, the Russian orbit and the Western orbit, and it can live quite comfortably in between the two. The big difference between Ukraine and Belarus is that in Ukraine you have real plurality in the society. You have basically two camps, the pro-Russian camp and the pro-Western camp, that are basically fighting it out. And on
quite literally, since one of the political parties is called Punch.
And you can use that. I mean, that's an in-way for us that we don't have in Belarus, which is a much smaller and a much more tightly kind of controlled place. So we have all kinds of options. That's the good thing. The bad thing is we're not very good at using them. And so we have our homework to do.
So you recommend more constructive engagement as opposed to a hard line that they take with Belarus, which is it's the carrot.
Belarus needs the hard line. In Ukraine, you still have a constructive element in the situation, even though it's getting worse. I will admit to this, but we have an option and we should use it.
We'll leave that as the final word, and in fitting that we give Jan Techau the final word on his wonderful, I think we can all agree, wonderful debut on the show. We look forward to having you back. Thank you for joining us, Jan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Daniel. And of course, thank you, Eddie Sanfilippo, who is always there in the background and is rolling his eyes right now. And thank you to all of you who have abandoned trick-or-treating to listen to us, or perhaps you're listening to us. We've all got our costumes here and we're heading out right now. We'll be back next Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 here on 90.2 FM. Until then, thanks for listening and good night from Counterpoint.